You're seriously marrying him? The question cut through the country club ballroom like a cold blade. A few people laughed. Others didn't bother hiding their pity. At the far end of the room stood Ethan Carter, a single father in a worn Navy work shirt, holding the hand of his 8-year-old daughter while a family worth hundreds of millions discussed him as if he weren't there. No one seemed interested in who he was. They had already decided what he was. Poor. Ordinary. A mistake. The crystal chandeliers reflected across polished marble floors as waiters moved between tables carrying trays of sparkling water and expensive appetizers. Victoria Sinclair sat beside her father, her jaw tight. The announcement had been made less than 10 minutes ago. To save a complicated family business arrangement and settle a decades-old promise between two families, she was expected to marry Ethan Carter, a mechanic, a widower, a man with a child. The whispers spread quickly. She could have had anyone. He fixes trucks for a living. This has to be some kind of joke. Ethan heard every word. Yet he simply knelt beside his daughter, Lily, and adjusted the loose strap on her shoe. Too tight, he asked gently. Lily shook her head. Better now. He smiled and stood. No anger, no embellishment, just quiet dignity. Outside, beyond the ballroom windows, his aging Ford pickup sat alone in the parking lot beneath a flickering lamp. It looked completely out of place among luxury SUVs and imported sedans. Victoria noticed it and felt another wave of frustration. Everything about this arrangement felt unfair. To her, to him, to everyone involved. But while others complained, Ethan seemed focused on one thing only, making sure his daughter felt safe. An hour later, the gathering ended. Ethan and Lily drove home through the cool Ohio evening. The dashboard light on the pickup glowed faintly. A stack of unopened utility bills rested beside a box of crayons on the passenger seat. At a red light near a 24-hour diner, Lily quietly asked, "Dad, are they mad at us?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Sometimes people get scared when life doesn't go the way they planned. "Are you scared?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "I'm responsible." The answer seemed simple, but it carried a weight Lily was too young to understand. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the repair shop before sunrise. The small garage sat beside a gas station and a grocery store on the edge of town. While other mechanics drank coffee and complained about customers, Ethan was already diagnosing an electrical issue that had baffled everyone the day before. He worked quietly, studying diagrams before making a precise adjustment. 10 minutes later, the engine started perfectly. "Lucky guess," one co-worker muttered. Ethan simply cleaned his tools and moved on. Across town, Victoria sat in a boardroom reviewing documents related to the upcoming marriage agreement. Most of the paperwork described Ethan as if he were a financial liability. Limited assets, modest income, blue-collar worker. She closed the folder and stared through the window. Something about the description bothered her. It felt incomplete. That afternoon, a certified letter arrived in Ethan's mailbox. Lily handed it to him as they stood on the porch of their small house. The envelope carried the seal of Sinclair Holdings. Lily smiled. "Is it about the wedding?" Ethan looked at the seal for several seconds before opening it. Inside was an invitation to a private family meeting scheduled for the following week. At the bottom was a handwritten note from Victoria's father. Most people would never have noticed the tiny technical error buried inside the attached business document. Ethan noticed it immediately, not because he was looking for it, because he understood something he should not have understood. His eyes narrowed for only a moment before he folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. Then he walked inside and helped Lily with her homework at the kitchen table. The mistake was small, but if left alone, it could cost the Sinclair family millions. And the strangest part was this: no mechanic should have recognized it at all. Yet Ethan had, and somewhere across town, Victoria was about to discover that the man everyone pitied might be hiding far more than anyone imagined. Ethan Carter could have ignored the mistake. No one would have blamed him if he had. The Sinclair family had spent an entire evening treating him like a problem to be managed, not a man to be respected. Yet the next morning, as sunlight filtered through the kitchen curtains of his small house, he sat at the table reviewing the document again, while Lily finished a bowl of cereal before school. A stack of utility bills rested beside him, their due dates highlighted in yellow marker. Lily pointed to one of the envelopes. "Are those the important papers?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Some of them." Then he folded the business document and slipped it into a plain folder. He never mentioned the error to anyone. Not yet. First came responsibilities. First came Lily. After dropping her off at school, Ethan watched her disappear into the crowded school hallway with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Only then did he return to his pickup truck and head toward the garage. The old Ford rattled slightly as it merged onto Main Street, passing the grocery store, the diner, and the church parking lot where volunteers were setting up tables for a weekend food drive. At the repair shop, the morning became unexpectedly difficult. The owner announced that a lucrative municipal maintenance contract had been awarded to another company. Several employees complained loudly. One mechanic blamed the economy. Another blamed politics. Someone glanced at Ethan. "Guess we all know why they did not pick us. We're just a bunch of grease monkeys." A few men laughed. Ethan simply returned to work. What nobody noticed was that he quietly reorganized a maintenance schedule that would save the shop hundreds of labor hours over the next few months. He scribbled the plan on a clipboard and handed it to the owner without explanation. The owner stared at it for several seconds. "Who came up with this?" Ethan shrugged. "Just seemed more efficient." The owner looked surprised. This could actually work. Ethan had already walked away before hearing the compliment. Across town, Victoria Sinclair sat through another frustrating meeting inside Sinclair Holdings headquarters. Lawyers discussed contracts. Executives discussed optics. Family members discussed appearances. Nobody discussed character. During a break, Victoria found herself thinking about Ethan again. Not the version everyone described. The version she had seen with Lily. The version who had remained calm while others mocked him. The contrast bothered her more than she wanted to admit. That afternoon, a sudden storm rolled across town. Rain hammered the streets. Traffic slowed near the hospital. Ethan had just finished work when he noticed an elderly woman struggling with grocery bags outside a supermarket. Without hesitation, he pulled his pickup into the lot, helped carry her bags through the rain, and drove her home. The woman thanked him repeatedly. Ethan simply wished her a good evening and left before she could ask his name. By the time he reached home, he was soaked. Lily was already sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. "You were late," she said. "Mrs. Patterson needed help." Lily nodded as if that explained everything. In their world, it usually did. Later that night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Ethan finally opened the folder again. The error in the Sinclair document was even worse than he first thought. Whoever drafted the agreement had overlooked a flaw that could trigger a disastrous financial dispute months from now. His eyes moved across the pages with practiced precision. Numbers, clauses, risk exposure, complex details that had no business making sense to a struggling mechanic. Yet they did. Very much so. At nearly the same moment, Victoria received an unexpected phone call from one of the company attorneys. His voice sounded concerned. "Miss Sinclair, we may have a serious problem buried in one of the merger documents." Victoria sat upright. "How serious?" There was a long pause. "Potentially very serious." She stared out her office window into the rain-darkened Ohio night, unaware that only a few miles away, the man everyone considered the least qualified person in her future had already found the problem before any of their highly paid experts. And by sunrise, she was about to discover something that would make her question everything she thought she knew about Ethan Carter. Victoria Sinclair had spent years around consultants, attorneys, analysts, and executives who were paid extraordinary amounts of money to spot problems before they became disasters. Yet by 9 o'clock the next morning, 3 senior attorneys were still arguing inside a glass-walled conference room, while the flaw in the merger documents remained unresolved. The atmosphere inside Sinclair Holdings felt tense and unusually quiet. Coffee cups sat untouched beside stacks of contracts. One attorney finally admitted what no one wanted to hear. "We should have caught this months ago." Victoria folded her arms. "Can it be fixed?" Nobody answered immediately. The silence spoke for itself. Then she remembered Ethan, the mechanic who somehow seemed to understand the same document. The thought sounded ridiculous, yet it refused to leave her mind. 2 hours later, Victoria found herself driving across town in a black SUV toward Carter Auto Repair. She felt almost embarrassed the moment she parked beside Ethan's aging pickup truck. The garage looked exactly as she expected. Concrete floors, toolboxes, the smell of motor oil, a faded soda machine humming near the entrance. It was the last place she imagined finding answers to a multi-million-dollar legal problem. Ethan was beneath a delivery van when she arrived. One of the mechanics called his name. He rolled out from under the vehicle, wiped his hands on a shop towel, and looked mildly surprised to see her. "Miss Sinclair." "Victoria is fine," she said. For a moment, neither spoke. The noise of impact wrenches echoed through the garage. Finally, she held up the folder. "I think you saw something in this document." Ethan glanced at it. "Maybe." The attorneys found a problem. He nodded. "I figured they would." Victoria stared at him, not because of what he said, but because of how calmly he said it. No pride. No attempt to impress her. Just a simple statement of fact. Across the street, customers drifted in and out of a small diner as lunchtime approached. Rainwater still lingered in puddles from the previous night's storm. Ethan looked at the folder again. "The issue is not the merger clause," he said. "It is the liability. Trigger attached to the restructuring section. Victoria blinked. That was exactly where the attorneys had finally located the problem. "How do you know that?" she asked. Ethan paused. "I have seen something similar before." The answer raised more questions than it solved. Before she could ask another, Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. The school. His expression changed immediately. Not fear, concern, responsibility. He answered at once. Minutes later, Ethan was driving toward Lily's elementary school, with Victoria unexpectedly following behind. Lily had slipped during recess and twisted her ankle. Nothing serious, the nurse assured them. Still, Ethan arrived within minutes. In the school hallway lined with student artwork and science fair posters, he knelt beside his daughter and listened carefully as she explained what happened. He never interrupted, never dismissed her feelings. By the time they reached the parking lot, Lily was smiling again. Victoria watched quietly from a distance. She had expected competence from successful people. She had seen plenty of that. What she had not expected was this kind of steady presence. This ability to make a frightened child feel safe without making the moment about himself. As Ethan helped Lily into the pickup truck, Victoria noticed something else. The folder containing the merger documents remained on the passenger seat beside utility bills and a second-grade spelling worksheet. Somehow both seemed equally important to him. Before leaving, Ethan looked toward Victoria. "The document can be fixed," he said, "but whoever wrote it made more than one mistake." Victoria felt a small chill despite the warm afternoon. "More than one?" Ethan nodded. "I only mentioned the biggest one." Then he closed the truck door and drove away. Victoria stood alone in the school parking lot, watching the old pickup disappear down the road. For the first time, she was no longer wondering whether Ethan Carter was being underestimated. She was beginning to wonder how much of him nobody had seen at all. The questions started spreading faster than answers. By the end of the week, several members of the Sinclair family had heard. Rumors that Ethan Carter had somehow identified flaws their attorneys missed. Instead of increasing their respect, the story produced something else. Suspicion. In the executive conference room overlooking downtown Columbus, Victoria sat quietly while her uncle Robert Sinclair paced near the windows. "This makes no sense," he said. "A mechanic does not review corporate restructuring agreements for fun." Another executive nodded. "Maybe somebody fed him information. Or maybe he's playing a longer game," Robert added. Victoria felt irritation rise in her chest. She was not sure why. Only days earlier, she might have agreed with them. Now she remembered Ethan kneeling beside Lily in the school hallway. She remembered the calm certainty in his voice when discussing the document. Neither memory matched the picture they were painting. Yet even she could not explain how he knew what he knew. The uncertainty lingered. That Saturday morning, Ethan was fixing a neighbor's furnace before winter arrived. The small house sat near a church parking lot where families were gathering for a community breakfast fundraiser. The elderly homeowner apologized repeatedly for not being able to pay much. Ethan simply repaired the problem, refused extra money, and accepted only a cup of coffee. By noon, he was back in his pickup truck heading toward a little league field where Lily was helping sell snacks, a youth fundraiser. His life moved from responsibility to responsibility without pause. No audience, no recognition, just quiet commitments kept one after another. As he parked beside the baseball diamonds, he noticed Victoria standing near the concession stand. She looked slightly out of place among folding chairs, minivans, and parents carrying coolers. "Miss Sinclair," he said. She almost smiled. "Victoria." "Right." For a moment, they watched children chasing foul balls beyond the chain-link fence. The autumn wind carried the smell of hot dogs and fresh-cut grass. Finally, Victoria handed him a folder. The attorneys found 2 more mistakes. Ethan looked unsurprised. "There are probably 4. Victoria stared at him. "How do you keep doing that?" Ethan glanced toward Lily before. "Answering. Experience." "Doing what?" she asked. He folded the folder shut. "Making expensive mistakes less expensive." The answer sounded simple, but it felt oddly practiced, as though it came from a world much larger than the repair shop. Before Victoria could press further, another problem appeared. Lily's fundraiser coordinator was struggling with a payment system failure. Credit card transactions had stopped processing, and parents were beginning to leave. The volunteers looked frustrated. The event depended on those donations. Without drawing attention to himself, Ethan walked over and asked a few questions. Within minutes, he identified the issue, rerouted the connection through a backup network, and restored the system. Several volunteers applauded. Ethan simply returned to collecting folding tables as though nothing unusual had happened. Victoria watched every second. "Most mechanics do not know how to do that," she said quietly. Ethan lifted a cooler into the bed of his pickup. "Most people know more than they get credit for." It was not a denial. It was not an explanation either. Later that evening, Victoria stopped at a diner on her drive home. Rain tapped softly against the windows while waitresses moved between booths carrying coffee refills. She found herself thinking about Ethan again. Every time she expected him to fit the story everyone told about him, he did something that contradicted it. Yet every time she thought she was getting closer to understanding him, he stepped back behind another layer of mystery. Then her phone buzzed. It was a message from one of the Sinclair attorneys. Attached was an old archive corporate report they had uncovered during their review. The subject line contained only 6 words. Victoria opened the file. Her eyes widened immediately, because buried inside the report was a name she never expected to find connected to Ethan Carter. And whatever it meant, it threatened to change everything she thought she knew about the man she was supposed to marry. Victoria remained in the diner long after her coffee had gone cold. Rain slid down the windows in silver streaks, while the old jukebox played softly in the corner. The document on her phone was not a rumor, not speculation, and not a misunderstanding. It was an archived corporate restructuring report from nearly a decade earlier. Listed among the lead analysts was a name she recognized immediately. Ethan Carter, not as a mechanic, not as a consultant, as a senior strategic advisor attached to one of the most successful recovery projects in the region. She read the line 3 times, then 4. The date matched a period years before anyone in the Sinclair family had ever heard of him. Her first instinct was disbelief. Her second was confusion. Why would a man with that background spend his days repairing transmissions and changing brake pads? The next morning, she drove to the garage before it opened. Ethan's pickup truck was already parked outside. Through the service bay door, she saw him sweeping the floor before his shift. The image felt impossible to reconcile with the document in her hand. "You worked in corporate restructuring," she said the moment he stepped outside. Ethan looked at the report. His expression did not change. "A long time ago." "You were not just involved," Victoria replied. "You helped lead it." Ethan folded the paper and handed it back. That was another chapter. Why leave? For the first time since she had known him, silence lingered before his answer. Because some things matter more than titles. He did not elaborate. He did not defend himself. He simply returned to work. Yet somehow that response stayed with Victoria more than any explanation could have. Later that afternoon, she found herself driving past a grocery store near Ethan's neighborhood. She spotted him loading bags into his truck beside an elderly veteran struggling with a walker. Ethan helped carry the groceries, secured them carefully in the man's vehicle, and waited until he drove away safely. There were no cameras, no audience, no advantage to gain, just another quiet act of kindness. Victoria began realizing something uncomfortable. Every important discovery about Ethan revealed not ambition, but responsibility. Not pride, but service. The revelation changed something inside her. Yet it also created a new problem. By Monday morning, word of Ethan's past had reached Robert Sinclair. Instead of admiration, the discovery fueled deeper suspicion. "He hid this from us," Robert said during a tense meeting. "People hide things for reasons. Or because they want privacy," Victoria replied. "Nobody walks away from that kind of career without a motive," Robert insisted. The room filled with speculation. Some believed Ethan was manipulating the family. Others suspected he wanted access to Sinclair assets. Victoria listened quietly, but the accusations no longer sounded convincing. She had seen too much. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had Ethan abandoned a career capable of making him wealthy? That evening, she found part of the answer. Lily had developed a high fever, and Ethan spent hours beside her in a hospital waiting room instead of attending a community event where several influential business leaders had invited him after hearing about his expertise. He never mentioned the missed opportunity. He never complained. He simply sat beside his daughter, holding a worn paperback book while doctors completed their evaluation. Watching from a distance after arriving to bring supplies, Victoria finally understood one truth. Ethan had not chosen the smaller life because he lacked ability. He had chosen it because someone needed him more. The realization struck her harder than any business credential ever could. But as Lily's condition improved and the evenings settled into relief, a nurse approached Ethan with an envelope that had arrived earlier in the day. He opened it slowly. The color drained from his face. Whatever was inside had clearly reached back into the part of his life he never discussed. And for the first time, Victoria saw genuine concern in his eyes. The envelope stayed unopened on Ethan's kitchen table until after Lily fell asleep. The small house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional rattle from the old heating system. A stack of utility bills sat beside Lily's school papers, reminders that life still demanded attention regardless of whatever waited inside that envelope. Ethan finally opened it near midnight. The letter came from a former business partner he had not heard from in years. A major investment group connected to one of his old corporate projects was facing a financial crisis. Their internal review had uncovered structural flaws nearly identical to the problems Ethan had already identified inside the Sinclair merger. They wanted his help. Immediately, Ethan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. It was not an opportunity. It was a temptation. The consulting fee alone would erase years of financial pressure. Yet accepting it would mean traveling, long hours, and less time with Lily. By sunrise, he still had not answered. Across town, pressure inside Sinclair Industries was growing. The merger problems were becoming more serious by the day. Attorneys were working overtime. Executives were growing nervous. During a strategy meeting, Victoria watched experts argue over projections that seemed to change every hour. Millions of dollars were potentially at risk. Then one analyst quietly admitted something that stunned the room. The only workable solution they had found closely matched recommendations Ethan had made days earlier. Silence followed. Robert Sinclair looked irritated rather than impressed. How does a mechanic keep predicting outcomes before specialists? Nobody had an answer. Victoria did not speak either, but she felt something changing. The evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon, she drove to the garage. Ethan's pickup truck sat outside beneath gray clouds. Inside, she found him helping a young apprentice who had accidentally damaged an expensive transmission component. The young man looked terrified. Ethan could have reported him, could have embarrassed him in front of everyone. Instead, he patiently showed him how to fix a mistake and quietly paid for part of the replacement cost himself. "Everyone gets one chance to learn," Ethan told him. The apprentice looked relieved beyond words. Victoria noticed something then. Whether he was discussing corporate risk or repairing engines, Ethan approached people the same way. He protected them when he could. He carried burdens others did not even know existed. The realization stayed with her long after she left. A few days later, another surprise arrived. The Sinclair legal team completed a deeper review of old records connected to Ethan's previous career. The findings spread quickly through executive offices. Years earlier, Ethan had been credited with helping save hundreds of jobs during a struggling company's restructuring. Yet there was almost no public recognition attached to his role. Several signatures had been removed from the final documents. Certain contributions had never been publicly acknowledged. It was as though someone had intentionally stepped out of the spotlight. Victoria stared at the report in disbelief. Most people fought for credit. Ethan seemed to avoid it. Meanwhile, a practical consequence of his hidden competence was already unfolding. His recommendations began stabilizing parts of the Sinclair merger review. Financial losses that had appeared inevitable were shrinking. Executives who had mocked him weeks earlier were unknowingly relying on his insights. Yet few of them knew it. Even fewer were willing to admit it. The pressure only increased when Robert learned that the outside investment group had also contacted Ethan. Suddenly, Ethan was no longer just an unwanted future son-in-law. He was becoming someone competitors and executives actively sought out. That realization made some people curious. It made others nervous. That evening, Victoria stopped by Ethan's house with documents requiring review. Through the front window, she saw him helping Lily finish a science project at the kitchen table. Glue sticks, markers, and construction paper covered the surface beside unpaid bills and merger notes. For a moment, she simply watched. One man balancing responsibilities that should have overwhelmed him years ago. When Ethan opened the door, she noticed another envelope resting near the mailbox he had just collected. Unlike the previous letter, this one carried the Sinclair family crest. Ethan looked at it once. Then his expression tightened. Because whatever message Robert Sinclair had decided to send was clearly not an invitation. And before Ethan even opened it, Victoria feared she already knew it meant trouble. The letter from Robert Sinclair was exactly what Victoria feared. It was not a request for help. It was a warning. Robert formally demanded that Ethan stop involving himself in matters connected to the Sinclair merger and refrain from offering recommendations to company personnel. The language was polite, but the message was unmistakable. Stay in your lane. Ethan read the letter once at his kitchen table and set it beside a stack of utility bills without comment. Lily was finishing homework nearby, occasionally asking questions about fractions. Ethan answered each one with the same patience he used everywhere else. Victoria watched in disbelief. "You're not going to respond?" she asked. Ethan glanced at the letter. "I just did." "You did not say anything." "Exactly." The answer frustrated her and impressed her at the same time. Most people would have fought back. Ethan simply returned his attention to Lily. Yet beneath his calm, pressure continued building. 2 days later, Victoria uncovered the reason certain records from Ethan's past seemed incomplete. While reviewing archived corporate files, she found testimony from former employees connected to the restructuring project Ethan had helped save years earlier. The picture finally became clear. Ethan had not merely advised the company. He had designed a recovery strategy that preserved hundreds of jobs when closure appeared unavoidable. More importantly, he had refused a lucrative executive promotion afterward because accepting it would have required relocating across the country shortly after Lily's mother passed away. Instead of pursuing a larger career, he chose stability for his daughter. Suddenly, every mystery from the previous weeks began fitting together. The business knowledge, the financial insight, the absence of public recognition, the modest house, the mechanic's uniform. None of it reflected what Ethan was capable of. It reflected what he had sacrificed. Victoria sat alone in a small diner after reading the records. The smell of coffee and grilled sandwiches filled the room while rain tapped against the windows again, just as it had the night she first discovered Ethan's name. For the first time, she felt ashamed of her original assumptions. She had mistaken humility for limitation. She had confused sacrifice with failure. Meanwhile, word of the discovery spread through parts of the Sinclair organization. Some executives quietly changed their opinions. Others became even more suspicious. Robert remained among the skeptics. People do not walk away from that kind of future, he insisted during another meeting. Not unless there is more to the story. His refusal to accept the evidence created a new obstacle. Even as Ethan's reputation improved, doubt continued shadowing him. Later that week, another example of Ethan's character surfaced unexpectedly. A severe storm damaged several homes in his neighborhood. Before dawn, Ethan loaded tools into his pickup truck and spent hours helping elderly residents secure loose roofing and clear debris. He asked for nothing in return. At one house near a church parking lot, Victoria arrived just in time to see him repairing a damaged wheelchair ramp for a veteran living alone. The man tried to offer payment. Ethan declined. "Just take care of yourself," he said. The veteran's eyes filled with gratitude. Victoria realized she was no longer searching for proof of Ethan's worth. She was searching for reasons she had failed to see it sooner. Yet even as respect for Ethan grew, danger approached from another direction. The outside investment group that had contacted him weeks earlier was becoming increasingly desperate. Their financial crisis was accelerating. They wanted Ethan to lead a rescue effort immediately, and the compensation being offered was substantial enough to transform his and Lily's future. The opportunity represented everything he had sacrificed years ago. The timing could not have been worse. Because on the same afternoon the offer officially arrived, Sinclair Industries entered its most critical phase of the merger review. Both sides suddenly needed Ethan. Both crises were connected. And for the first time, he could not help everyone. Standing beside his pickup truck outside Lily's school hallway after dismissal, Ethan stared at the two competing folders in his hands. One represented financial security. The other represented responsibility. Victoria saw the conflict in his eyes. What she did not know was which choice he was about to make. And that answer would change everything. For 2 days, Ethan carried both folders everywhere he went. One represented the outside investment group and a future that could finally give Lily financial security. The other represented the Sinclair merger, a responsibility he had never asked for but could not completely ignore. Every choice seemed to cost something. Every path meant disappointing someone. The pressure followed him from the garage to the grocery store, from late-night kitchen tables to early mornings in his pickup truck. Yet the hardest part was not choosing between opportunities. It was watching the consequences of his silence grow around him. Robert Sinclair had become increasingly convinced that Ethan's involvement with Sinclair Industries was self-serving. The more evidence emerged about Ethan's past accomplishments, the more Robert interpreted them as proof of hidden ambition. During a tense executive meeting, he openly questioned Ethan's motives. He knew exactly what he was doing from the beginning, Robert argued. Nobody keeps that kind of experience secret unless they are positioning themselves for something. Several executives nodded. Others remained uncertain. Victoria tried to defend Ethan, but the room was already leaning toward suspicion. For the first time, she realized something painful. Facts alone were not changing people's minds. Some people had already decided who Ethan was. Meanwhile, Ethan made his choice. He declined a lucrative offer from the investment group. The decision came quietly. No announcement, no negotiation. He simply informed them that his daughter and existing commitments came first. The consulting fee would have changed their lives. Instead, he returned home and sat at the kitchen table reviewing Lily's science project while a stack of overdue utility bills remained tucked beneath a notebook. When Victoria learned what he had done, she was stunned. "You turned it down?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "Lily needs stability. Do you realize how much money that was?" Ethan smiled faintly. "More than enough." "Then why?" For a moment, he looked toward a framed photograph of Lily from years earlier. "Because I already know what matters most." Victoria had no answer. Yet while Ethan was sacrificing another opportunity, a new crisis was quietly unfolding. The Sinclair merger entered its final review stage. Several of Ethan's earlier recommendations had prevented major losses, but because he was no longer directly involved, key executives modified portions of the strategy without understanding the full structure. Problems immediately began resurfacing. Robert refused to seek Ethan's advice. Pride became more important than results. Then the situation worsened. A confidential internal memo was leaked to several board members. The document implied that Ethan had deliberately positioned himself to influence Sinclair decisions for personal gain. The allegations were unsupported, but they spread quickly. By the time Victoria learned about it, the damage was already happening. Whispers replaced questions. Doubt replaced gratitude. At Lily's school hallway, Ethan began noticing parents who normally greeted him suddenly looking away. At the garage, coworkers received calls asking about his past. Even the owner seemed uncertain. Ethan never defended himself. He kept showing up, kept working, kept helping others. One evening, after finishing a repair, he drove across town to help the elderly veteran whose wheelchair ramp he had fixed weeks earlier. The man's furnace had stopped working during a cold spell. Ethan repaired it without charging $1. Yet on the drive home, the weight of everything finally showed. For the first time, he looked tired. Not physically, emotionally, as though years of choosing responsibility over recognition had finally caught up with him. The lowest moment arrived 3 nights later. Lily came home from school unusually quiet. While sorting papers at the kitchen table, she hesitated before speaking. "Dad," she asked softly, "did you do something bad?" The question landed harder than any accusation from the Sinclair board. Ethan looked up slowly. Lily explained that another student had repeated things adults were saying about him. For several seconds, the room fell completely silent. The man who could solve million-dollar problems suddenly faced the one thing he could not bear, his daughter questioning his integrity. Ethan gently took her hand and assured her that he had always tried to do the right thing. But after she went to bed, he sat alone in the dark kitchen staring at the unopened mailbox notices and unpaid bills. Outside, rain tapped against the windows. Inside, everything felt closer to breaking than ever before. Then, just before midnight, Victoria arrived unexpectedly carrying a thick file box. Her eyes were red from exhaustion, but there was something else there too. Hope. She placed the box on the table and looked directly at Ethan. "I found the truth," she said quietly. "And tomorrow everyone else is going to see it too." The file box Victoria carried into Ethan's kitchen contained more than documents. It contained years of buried truth. The rain continued tapping against the windows while the old clock above the refrigerator marked each passing minute. Utility bills still sat on the corner of the table. Lily slept down the hallway. And for the first time, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Victoria opened the box and spread the records across the table. Internal reports, archive correspondence, executive statements, testimonies from former employees, the missing pieces from a story that had been scattered for years. "You never told anyone," Victoria said quietly. Ethan studied the papers without answering. "You saved those jobs," she continued. "You built the recovery plan. You turned down promotions. You gave up recognition. And when the company offered bonuses, you redirected part of your compensation into employee retention programs." Ethan finally looked up. People needed those jobs. Victoria shook her head slowly. "And you let other people take the credit." Ethan's answer was simple. The credit would not have paid their mortgages. The room fell silent. By morning, Victoria had arranged an emergency review meeting with Sinclair leadership and board members. Robert Sinclair arrived expecting another argument. Several executives arrived expecting another round of speculation. Instead, Victoria walked into the conference room carrying the file box. One by one, she presented the evidence. Not rumors, not opinions. Facts, signed records, verified financial reports, testimony from former executives. Every question people had asked about Ethan over the previous weeks suddenly had an answer. Why did he understand complex restructuring agreements? Because he had helped design some of the most successful recovery plans in the region. Why had he walked away from that world? Because after Lily's mother died, he chose to raise his daughter instead of chasing promotions. Why had nobody heard about his accomplishments? Because he repeatedly refused public recognition when it came at the expense of the people he was trying to protect. The room grew quieter with every page. Then Victoria revealed the final document. It showed that years earlier Ethan had voluntarily stepped away from a substantial ownership position that would be worth millions today. The reason was written in his own statement. Stability for his daughter came first. No one spoke. The room went silent. Robert stared at the papers. Several executives lowered their eyes. Others simply sat motionless. For weeks they had questioned Ethan's motives. For weeks they had assumed ambition where there had only been responsibility. The silence felt heavier than any apology. Meanwhile, outside the corporate offices, another truth was unfolding. The revised merger strategy, based largely on Ethan's original recommendations, had stabilized the deal. The losses everyone feared were avoided. The solutions worked because they had been built on experience, integrity, and careful judgment rather than ego. The results spoke for themselves. Yet when Victoria later found Ethan, he was not celebrating. He was standing beside his pickup truck outside Lily's school, helping carry supplies for a student fundraiser. Parents moved through the parking lot. Children laughed near the entrance. Life continued exactly as it always had. "They know the truth now," Victoria said. Ethan nodded. "Good. That is all you have to say?" A small smile crossed his face. The truth was always the truth. Victoria laughed softly, shaking her head. Months earlier, she would have found that answer frustrating. Now she understood it perfectly. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Not because Ethan demanded it, because people finally saw it. Respect replaced suspicion. Former critics offered apologies. The garage owner publicly thanked him for his loyalty. Neighbors who had heard rumors now spoke about his character instead. Even Robert Sinclair eventually appeared at Ethan's house one evening, carrying no documents and no demands. Just a quiet acknowledgement that he had been wrong. Ethan accepted it with the same grace he showed everyone else. No victory speech. No viternis. Only dignity. One Saturday afternoon, the community gathered near the church parking lot for a local fundraiser. Children played on the grass. Food trucks lined the street. Volunteers moved between folding tables. Ethan stood with Lily, who proudly displayed a ribbon she had earned at school. Victoria joined them beneath the warm autumn sunlight. Looking around, she realized something profound. Ethan had spent years building a life that looked ordinary from the outside. Yet underneath, it was extraordinary strength. Not the strength to dominate a room, the strength to sacrifice, to endure misunderstanding, to keep choosing responsibility when nobody was watching. Lily slipped her hand into her father's and smiled. "I told you my dad is a good man," she said. Ethan looked down at her, and for a moment his eyes reflected everything he had fought to protect. The promotions he declined, the recognition he surrendered, the opportunities he sacrificed. None of it had been wasted, because the thing he valued most was standing beside him. As the afternoon sunlight settled across the community and conversations drifted through the air, Ethan realized something he had never chased had finally found him anyway. Respect. Not because he demanded it, not because he revealed it, because character has a way of speaking for itself when given enough time. In the quiet that followed, surrounded by people who finally understood who he truly was, the life he had built no longer looked small at all.